Hey everybody, welcome back to the Billy Club, the show where we take a look at the adventures of Marvel's swashbuckling yellow-bellied fear man in all of his early 1960s appearances. I'm Nico, and you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Nico Action. That's NicoAction.
I'm Tori. You can find me on Twitter at Tori_Sheehan and on Instagram at SMTori. That's Tori with an I.
We were talking in the green room about how this is like our first favorite issue of the series. I love the owl. He is so great. He is so silly, and silly is so good. And I've said it a million times on Access for Podcast, so I'm going to say it here one more time. The owl is responsible for Apocalypse. How well the brilliant Louise Simonson, who had long worked with Ann Nesenti through the X Office, was given the responsibility of taking over X Factor because Bob Layton, the brilliant writer and artist that he is, was really struggling to hit his deadlines. So he did not feel equipped to do the book justice and decided to step down. Now, the last page of his final issue saw an outline of a figure standing in a doorway, commanding the axis of evil to do his bidding. It was going to be the owl. But instead, they turned it into Apocalypse. And if you think about their body shapes, shave off the ears, and it's kind of there. So, even the things the owl isn't responsible for, so, non-bird related crime, he's still sort of vaguely, indirectly responsible for. And I just want to thank the owl for giving us the Krakoan era and the Arakan era. And all right, but back to Daredevil. Tori, the owl, how great was it to play around with Leland finally?
It's just so much fun. He's so tacky.
So tacky.
In the beginning. It's hard to take him seriously. And I think this was definitely the issue where I texted Nico and I was like, is Wilson Fisk around? Because he's making a lot of I will be the Overlord of Crime statements if the Kingpin's around. And he was like, no, there's no Kingpin. And I was like, oh, wow. So he does get to be on top for a little bit. Good for him.
Yeah.
Actually, now that you're talking about things about the owl, which came first, owl or penguin?
I got to assume the penguin. Now, I don't have my bat history quite down as well as my Daredevil history. My big things at Marvel are the X-Men and Daredevil, and then my big things at DC are Vertigo and the Lantern Corps. And I have a lot of bat knowledge because of all of the kind of bat Daredevil crossover. But I'll be honest, if I had to assume, I would assume that Penguin is a 1950s villain, and that would predate the owl. That said, they both feel very generic crime noir bad guy, kind of like deformed bird person. Mm-hmm. I think that that's very in line with Mole Man and Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective.
You mean my favorite Disney movie? I love that movie.
1,000%. Anybody that wants can fight me.
Listen,
fight me.
That clock fight is the most stressful thing you will ever watch.
It's
in your
beautiful.
Life.
It's okay. I did not know we shared this, and now that I know that we share this, it's just made our friendship even better. Man, our noir love goes everywhere.
Everywhere.
So, right off the bat, Daredevil #3, it's still got that gigantic logoing on the cover that we're not crazy about. But let me say how much I love the fagoliciousness of that corner box. Oh my God. What a Gaylord. Look at him with those little hips and the little shoulder pop. And
Nico, that's been there for 3 issues.
I love it more now than ever. I don't know if it's the explosion of the owl beneath it, but there's just something about the way it sits on this cover that I'm about it.
He's got a green background this time. It pops.
And you know what? I think it's something about the amount of white on this cover that there's a lot more drawing you to what feels like a cover. The first 2 felt like splash ads for Daredevil. Mm-hmm. But this has it's not like I'm saying that this is Jim Steranko. You know what I mean? Like, we're not saying that we're looking at, sort of like high point of the creation in that era. We're still talking about like Daredevil finding its feet. We're still on a bi-monthly schedule in 1964. There's still some clunkiness to the positioning of stuff, but like,
Yeah. And he needs to be careful finding his feet on this cover because there's a trap door underneath him.
oh, he can't even possibly know that he's standing on the trap door when he's not sure where his other foot is.
Can't know. Can't. It's off page. What are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? And I think this is the first cover that like puts Karen in an active role instead of appearing visually on the first cover in like a floating head kind of way.
Is that Karen?
I mean, it's a
I mean,
blonde
it is.
font.
It is.
It is. So it's got to be. Because at this point, we can just kind of tell women apart by hairstyles.
Yeah, that's all we get. That's all we
Kind
get.
of.
But I mean, I love that this is the first time where Daredevil is the biggest thing on his own cover. That's
Yeah.
nice. There is no Fantastic Four member on his cover. That's very nice.
It's shocking. That's
The
for
first
sure.
time. First time for everything.
And I think one of the things that's really great is this cover still has a lot going on for it.
Yes.
It's still got multiple figures on it, so it doesn't feel like kind of like a forgotten cover or anything. I love the sort of shape of the shadow behind the throne being the owl's menacing body with kind of the bright owl kind of eyes right behind him. So they're really going for a visual in an era where, let's face it, like Daredevil's iconography is all over the fucking place. Spider-Man is the Amazing Spider-Man, and then a lot of his bad guys are bugs or goblins. There's a consistency to it. And we talked about this a little bit last episode, but there's no consistent iconography across Daredevil or his bad guys yet, really. So having kind of this sort of forethought put into the cover where they're both kind of these horned figures, it's kind of a nice thing to see. It makes me feel like we're starting to pull it together. Here really may come Daredevil.
Yes. It definitely feels more like I feel like, I don't want to say the word Renaissance painting because that's not true, but it feels composed.
Yeah,
it feels like it has
that.
balance. It feels like they're like someone at some point thought about a Fibonacci sequence, like part of it. Like it just feels like a solid piece of art finally.
And it's really interesting because this is still the same creative team as the second issue. Daredevil #3 was written by Stan Lee, illustrated by Joe Orlando, inked by Vince Colletta, with once again letters by S. Rosen. And it really is an example, I think, of where the more one person drew the character, the more the character sort of it came into a sort of understanding and a concept. I felt like I not only recognized Daredevil more visually here, but I feel like I recognized the physicality of Daredevil by Orlando and Colletta pretty readily.
Yes. I also love the tone that they set with this one on the inner cover page. That owl is terrifying. The extra eyes behind Leland are creepy. It's a beautiful way to set up the creep factor for a villain that's supposed to be creepy but comes off a little tacky right now.
Oh, for sure. And the way that they understand how to kind of balance things from the cover to the inner cover, I feel like we lost a lot of space in the first two issues to those sort of, I don't want to say over the top, but certainly definitively striking frontispieces. Here, the frontispiece plays into introducing the owl, and we see the shrunken Daredevil logo. It doesn't still say, "Here comes Daredevil, the man without fear." It just says, "Daredevil battles the owl, ominous overlord of crime." There's a lot more thought being put into where the letters need to be on this cover in a way that definitely provides me a little more understanding of what they're going for. I'm a little thrown by why they need to mention that it's a movie-length thriller. It's just standard 22 pages. I wonder if perhaps around this time a number of books were getting shortchanged pages for whatever reason.
Possible.
But yeah, that owl is fucking terrifying. And these sort of big, scary fucking eyes lingering in the background is a huge element of the owl's iconography.
Which is really cool because you don't see them really pop up again in the rest of the issue. So like for me, I'm just like, oh, that's creepy and weird. So, but owls are always watching, so like I get the idea.
Oh yeah, and it's really interesting because you've mentioned that the owl is kind of tacky, and I think he's tacky in a way I really enjoy.
He's high camp.
Yeah,
He's
he's
high camp.
really high camp, and
High camp.
he actually does some stuff that I have called out in more modern comics. There's a couple of characters that when they show up, I'm pretty famous for eye rolling. I'm not interested in their shenanigans. And here it's adorable because, we're talking about 1964, which is clearly already a position in American history where bad guys were legitimately bad. You know what I mean? We're not talking about an era where we were still in a social contract that forbade the understanding of who the bad men were.
Yes.
And that this is the ideal of like evil noir capitalism in 1964. He's like a Lon Chaney character.
Yes.
And I love that here.
It's not really a fedora, but the trilby that he's wearing.
Yeah.
The fact that first time that you sort of see his face in the second panel page, like he's a little green looking. He's got an old fashioned overcoat with the top cape on it. Like it feels like we're about to have a very Jekyll and Hyde moment, which is so interesting because in the beginning, the owl does not have owl features.
Agreed.
And so there's not a Jekyll and Hyde feeling to this guy. It's just Leland. He's just crazy. So
but it's like actual crazy. You know what I mean?
He's crazy.
He's like actual crazy. The Fixer is kind of like, nah, see, I'm gonna arrange it so that the guy takes a foul and then I'm gonna make all the money. You see,
he's dumb.
And then Electro is kind of like an actual criminal mastermind, but he's not crazy and he's not brilliant, but he's not stupid. He's kind of like a run-of-the-mill bad guy. The Owl gets off on this. The Owl is literally like, I'm going to kill you. This is going to be so fun for me. LOL. Yeah. I'm a bird. Like, he's nuts.
I feel like the Fixer wants to beat the shit out of you. He doesn't he doesn't so much murder for fun. He murders for consequence. Okay. Electro, to me, isn't really in the murder business. That's too dirty. Like, that's not what he's into. But I feel like Leland will just like show up at your door and be like, you know where you'd look pretty? In 15 pieces all over the harbor.
I can't wait to see you on the sidewalk.
Right? Like, and I guess that's like that bird of prey feel that we're supposed to get out of him. So for me, like, Leland is definitely the scariest one that we've had so far. Also because he does have a surprisingly good facade in society. Which is another Jekyll and Hyde reference. Wow, Tori. Wow.
You know, and the other thing that I think really supports your point about his facade in society is he plays a Daredevil Matt role while looking like Foggy.
Yes.
He doesn't look really that unlike Foggy here. And I don't think that's a knock on Orlando. I think that's a little bit more a statement about the sort of universality of commonized fashion in white 1960s. You know, it's Mad Men. Everybody on Mad Men that wasn't one of those freaky young beatniks or one of the hot ones was, dressing exactly the same. And they all dressed like Roger or Don in 3 different colors. You know what I mean? And so there's just something, I don't know, this also has like all of my favorite hallmarks of the Daredevil issue. The bad guy kills somebody on the first 2 pages. Daredevil gets involved. Then Matt gets involved because somebody finds them in the fucking phone book. Like, that's one of my favorite stupid Daredevil conceits. And it is one of the dumbest Daredevil conceits.
I hate it.
I
I love
love
it and I
it.
hate it.
I love it to hate it. I hate to
I
love
know.
it, and I
I
love to
know.
hate it. It's
I'm
so
just like, it's
stupid.
always this one. It's always open it up to the middle. 1, 2, 3, pink. Nelson and Murdock. Every
Every
time.
time.
Every
Every
time.
time.
You know what? You know what sucks? What that sucks for? Naples know it all and knock them off. Like the
Yeah.
guy right ahead of him.
Like, they're ready to do law stuff, but they keep having to go to smaller and smaller spaces.
But like also, I think the biggest distraction when it comes to Leland is how pink Foggy's outfit is.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
deeply upsetting. But no, yeah, no, I love Leland. I love how creepy his face is and how perfect it is for maniacal laughing. Like it's all the jowls.
And
All of them right
it's this
there.
the crazy eyes coming out of like the bigness. There's like
That's
kind
the
of a Harvey Weinstein to it.
that's the thumbprint for the YouTubes. Dial that. That's it.
And
Yeah.
there's so much about this one finally kind of blending the law stuff a little bit more correctly. It feels like the law story is furthering the Daredevil story, which is like
Yes.
the hallmark of good DD.
Yes.
That's like a
This is now that moment where Matt decides to defend the guy that he's fighting at night. And he's just like, yeah, I got that. No, I can compartmentalize.
and it's so much throughout this issue because I feel like the first issue was Matt chasing the Fixer and then fighting the Fixer. The second issue was Matt chasing Electro, then piloting a rocket, then riding a horse, then climbing a flagpole, then flying across the city on a helicopter. Exactly. I feel like for that set of issues, we were constantly dealing with Daredevil and Matt, neither one of them interacting with the bad guy in any meaningful way. But here we see that the Owl actually is a pretty reasonable antagonist for Daredevil.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think that this is an excellent way to showcase that Matt does as much villain punching in the courtroom as he would as Daredevil. And I think this is a really good showcase of like Foggy and Matt and how they work together. So I definitely dig that this adds more to the Matt character because we have just been complaining about how we don't know who Matt is, and in this one we get a little more Matt finally.
And I feel like it goes a little bit further than just a little bit more Matt, because you're right, I completely agree with you. But it's kind of like the book is finally getting its feet. The color choices feel a lot more consistent with issue 3. And, I've read a lot of the books from 63, 64, 65. This is an era that I've read extensively for my different projects and for pleasure. And not everything had these vibrant, punchy, weird colors. Not everything made the whole city purple. And I think some of the color choices are a result of Daredevil being primarily yellow, black, and red. So the secondary color choices that set what this is to look like come from that, because you then expect a blue and pink kind of sky. That meant that the owl's airy or rookery, whatever the fuck he's calling it this page, on page 8 has like, it's like a goddamn Skittles bag, and it works for Daredevil.
Do you think it's because he's colorblind?
I would accept it.
Matt can never see color, so anytime we're watching just Matt, everything's just all fucked up.
Well, I also love that how much they come to use that in the book, where it starts to be like, what color is this? Is almost shorthand for, are you really Daredevil? Are you really Matt Murdock? And, there's even funny, subtle, in-universe color stuff where we commented in the second issue how much we loved the golden richness of Daredevil during the Electro fight, more than perhaps the, as you pointed out, kind of clownier yellow of his standard costume. And I can't help but feel like pages 6, 7, 8, they really do transition him into that golden yellow, almost like they know that the red costume is coming. Almost like they know that this yellow is unsustainable in so many ways. And I think, this for me really is the first Daredevil issue. those first two, they're cool, but this is Daredevil.
Yeah. This is when we find our footing. This is when people start saying, hey, I really enjoyed that episode last night. I'm going to tell my friends about it, kind of stuff. But it's also the issue where Matt decides to give himself a backpack. So, you know, there's always a downside to every great episode. Every season 2 of Buffy still has I Robot You. No, that's from season 1.
No, but there's definitely plenty of.
There's some shitty ones in there.
And that's what's always so crazy about comics, because for the most part, like, clunkers lift out a little bit easier of a comic run than they do of a series or like a TV show, because you can just get the couple of pages you need from it. If you were really asking me to summarize what matters about this issue, I would say it's just coming into contact with the Owl, a legal enemy and a vigilante enemy who actually tests the mettle of our hero. Yes. Because there's a big hot dude wrestling a gorilla in this, and that is just pure 60s crack. Yep. And there's henchmen being thrown down what is pretty clearly a well baby Jessica style. And once again, that's just sort of pure 60s crack. And
bird cages.
Yeah. We're looking at, yeah.
What are we doing?
What are we doing here? I still think it's a great issue, is the thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because it hits a lot of the beats that I really love that kind of do become synonymous with the Owl. I think the Airy is one of the most lunatic sets in the world because it's so big and it's so garish. How aren't they always just attacking it?
How did no one notice?
Thank you.
Because like it's in the Palisades. You can see the Palisades.
Yeah. Is this where they built the mall?
Yeah, probably. If they probably were just scrub the eyeballs off of it. That's the mall.
That's where the giant elevator goes. I also can't help but notice this is the first time boat transport becomes a thing. And I don't think I've come across it so much in my X-Men reading, my Avengers reading, but a lot of Daredevil stories inexplicably pan to somebody escaping via boat.
I think it's because, as they reveal in this issue, water is not Daredevil's friend.
Yeah, and that is definitely going to come and go. That's one of those things that we see kind of sometimes water helps him. Sometimes it's rain and it makes everything clear for him. Sometimes it's water and it's like punching through Jello or whatever. But the thing that Daredevil cannot punch through is Karen's tears.
Like, I do love that this is the first time we see Karen in mortal danger. We're going to come back to that, almost every issue. But like, we really push more of the I want to fix you trope on this one. And like, his grumpiness about it is not okay. But also like, back off, Karen. He said no once already. And it's cool.
I feel like this is also indicative of what a lot of Daredevil is going to come to look like. In a lot of ways, we get a lot of the very intimate, private moments from these characters. We get sort of like different facial close-ups, and then there's, of course, the juxtaposition to the fact that he is Daredevil at the bottom of the page. And that's, I think, one of those really classic images of Daredevil. He's standing there. There's no the man behind him. Like, that's not an image of Matt Murdock's shadow. That's just who Daredevil is this complex multi-person. And I feel like this is also the first time we get that. You know, I feel like in 1 and 2, we're kind of fine with the fact that he's Daredevil. It's whatever. But this is the first one where he's like, am I Matt Murdock? Am I Daredevil? It's not quite as clear as I'd like it to be, but it's definitely moving towards where I want it to move for the sake of these characters becoming more realized.
Yeah. One of the things about Daredevil is that he creates very, very, very separate identities for who he is under the mask and who he is at work. And right now they sort of bleed into each other, which is it feels very weird coming back to it, because you're so used to them being so defined that you're used to actually like it's a dual lead. It's
Right.
Matt and it's
And Daredevil.
Daredevil. Like
Yeah.
they're two separate people. And to see them be very close to the same person with the same motivations, the same goals, the same things. Like even when Daredevil later is like saving Karen from things and thinking about how much he loves her, it's with the cold detachment of the horns in comparison to the caring, kinder man in a suit in a lawsuit kind of thing. So it's odd for
Yeah.
me. But for a new reader, it might be fun. I don't know.
Well, and I think for me, one of the problems is so much of him saving Karen in this issue feels manufactured.
Yes.
I don't feel like Karen actively became involved in this story. I feel like she, as it shows on panel, is abducted directly into the narrative of
Mm-hmm.
Daredevil, where
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't really belong by the story's own kind of like beat principles. So when they wind up swinging like cool cages and bird, like, you know, it's a little not what I wanted from this issue, but it goes back to being fun crack the minute Daredevil breaks out like it's nothing,
Yeah.
because that is a the Owl thing.
Yeah.
The Owl has no idea who he's facing, and he always does all of this research, but he has no idea. It does feel like Karen's kind of incidental here once Daredevil breaks free, but it's it's Daredevil swinging from a birdcage to save Karen while fighting the owl in a giant building off the coast of the Palisades in New York that looks like a giant owl.
I also think that it's one of those things where we need to introduce someone who thinks Daredevil is awesome. Because like up till now, like Foggy doesn't talk about him, Karen doesn't talk about him, so we have no idea what people think about Daredevil yet.
Agreed.
And so we need someone who's around to say, "Oh my God, that Daredevil, he's just so great." And it's going to be Karen, who's like, he reminds me of someone else great. Weird.
And I think one of the things that makes Karen such a great person for this is it kind of goes back to something we discussed in an earlier episode. Foggy's near impotent hero worship of Matt. Like it does feel like Foggy puts himself below Matt. It almost feels like Foggy says to Karen, I know I'm not Matt, but at least I've got my sight. And it's a situation where I don't know that Foggy could be like pro Daredevil without seeming unbelievably weak for it. Like
I
Foggy's
mean,
already like a wet noodle, and I feel like if he worshipped Daredevil on top of it, it would take away any access to self-possession.
right. There's something in that in what you said that reminded me of the idea of courtly love, in that
Mm,
both of their adoration for Matt can allow them to adore each other. And I think that Foggy's there. Karen's not there yet, but I agree that like it's okay to be gay for one guy, but if you're gay for a guy in tights too, you might have to reconsider what you're thinking. And I feel like for Foggy, that's be too much, because usually, and I mean, spoiler alert, Foggy's usually the one who's like, that damn Daredevil is tearing up the city again. And Karen's like, no, he's a good man. And that's what we live with
and I
for
feel like
20 years.
what would men and boys in the 1960s have thought of a guy who is like, no, my blind best friend, he's the stud, and this superhero, he's the stud, because that's pretty much what Karen is.
Yeah.
Karen is Daredevil is so hot and cool, and Matt is so hot and cool. And again, I'm only throwing in the even though he's disabled, because the book goes out of its way to hit the disability as a plot point so consistently.
Yeah.
We look at Karen as coded dramatically and dangerously female. I mean, she is a woman, so I'm not saying coded, but like she's so defined by her tropes of era that it's problematic. And then imagine if they had switched it around. Imagine if it was Foggy. We would be sitting here today talking about gay Foggy Nelson and how he finally came out, because it would have really, talking about how if Foggy had loved both Matt and Daredevil, it is unbelievably clear to me how little they gave Karen.
Yeah. They gave her very little to work with, and I feel like it's it's almost like she's the continuation of the nerd fantasy, because
Yeah.
that's what this is. Like, to have the big jock that's your big bro be like, this little nerd is so cool, and the girl to be like, that nerd is so cool. Like, it's for all the little nerds who read the comic books in the 60s to be like, I too can be a productive member of society,
Right.
instead of making Facebook and becoming an incel.
And that's kind of like, it's a weird thing to say, but Karen's perspective on the situation she's in with Matt almost actually reflects kind of elements of incel culture. Why won't you just love me? I could fix you and change core elements about you and remove the things I see as weaknesses to make you perfect if you would just fucking touch me.
So there's like a lot going into like the idea of the female career woman in the 60s, because she's not obviously not like a bra burning like feminist type. She's very much I went to typing school so that I could go to work and meet myself a man. Like, Karen very much like walked into the interview with Foggy Nelson and went, two eligible bachelors who are lawyers, sign me up, because that's how you get a man. You end up marrying the guy you type for. Like, that happened a lot. And for her to be like, I can fix you, is a lot of the idea that men knew that their lives were better if they married, and if they had a woman who was interested in their betterment, that was even better, because she can help you do the social climbing thing, because men with wives were able to like host dinners where their bosses could come to, their clients could come
Jackie
to.
O it up.
Yeah, they could Jackie O it up. And so it's to your betterment to find a girl who's like, I can help you, I can make you better, I can take you to that next level, while completely worshiping you at all times and not trying to change you to what I want, but to change you to what you want. And so she's like living that lane in a really era appropriate, super specific way. So like, she makes sense for the time period, especially this is like that ideal kind of lady where you're like, she can hang out with the guys, but she really just wants to be home ironing your underwear kind of thing. She
And
all that.
yeah, 1,000%. And it's
It's a lot.
yeah. And
It's a
like,
lot to like think about now, but like back then this would have been like curtains. Like, yes, we get it, it's just background noise. Like, yes, that's how women act in the workplace.
so I'm reading this in 2022, and I've read it since like 1990, whatever, the first time I read my Daredevil Masterworks hardcovers, whatever. But I've always read it as Karen is written unfairly to women. But I think what I'm hearing you say is by 1964 standards, Matt was an idiot and was looking past this perfect woman by era appropriate standards.
Yes. Karen is a girly feminist. That's Gurley, which was an early form of feminism, which just basically said, ladies, you can pick the guy you want. That's feminism. But yeah, no, like, Foggy's the one being like, you're perfect, you're everything, I can be the guy, you can make me better, look at me, I'm a louse. And she's just like, but what about that one? That one's got bigger issues. And Matt's just like, nah, I'm good. And like, Foggy must be sitting there being like, bro, she wants to take you to the next level, like, you could be president, like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Like it's weird because now that you're saying all of this, it's almost like, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything new, and please forgive me for coming to feminism on the next level a little late. I've always been very pro the advancement
I
of
mean, I don't
women.
know if I would call this feminism, but I would call this like an assessment of like what a good wife would be
Yeah,
as a man.
it's almost like Karen is groomed by society's patriarchy to groom Matt, but it's not that she has agency in grooming him. It's the patriarchy has informed and demanded of her the ways in which she will put pressure on Matt to grow.
Yes. It's the old like why like a queen would have her own court and she could like fuck around with shit around there and have her own sense of power that had to deal with like influencing the wives who would talk to the husbands who would talk to the king, like that kind of stuff where it's like all subterfuge and all in the background and all based on like what colors you're wearing for dinner and kind of stuff. But like this is what Karen is doing. Karen is 100% playing the game to the best of her ability to get what she wants, which is a husband and security and not have to be a typist all day. And Matt is just like not getting it.
It's unfortunate that I believe the metaphor they're going for is he's blind.
He's blind. Did you know that love is blind as well as justice?
And we've talked 3 times now about how this is a romance noir,
Mm-hmm.
and that's hitting a lot of the buttons for me. What's fascinating is it never, because Daredevil doesn't properly save Karen. Daredevil does not swing out of there on the grappled billy club with his damsel in his arms. Exactly, we both did the thing. Because he doesn't do that, it doesn't feel like he rescues her quite the way
No.
it would. Like, as somebody who talks to me a lot about story structure, I feel like his failure to save Karen as Daredevil relates to his almost Hemingway-like impotence as Matt.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like he did the thing where he's like, go, 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 go. And she goes and she sort of drives herself out of there. And then he drags himself out of the river later. Like she she's given the opportunity to run and she does. She doesn't do the stupid thing and try to stick around to help. Because she's not there yet. Um, but yeah, he doesn't actually like do the real save. Like he doesn't come in, punch the guy, get the girl, get out the door that we're very used to. Because he's captured with her, he's already on the level of her
Yeah,
being
yeah.
caught, and then he gets them out, but like then immediately like can't can't just like escape after doing like a one punch knockout. So I agree. Like he's not nailing it
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form. Which is why like her coming out with like, oh my god, Daredevil's so great is like, girl, you're getting a victim like this complex about victims and like wanting to help all these baby birds. That's going to be super helpful for you in the 80s. But like
But
right now is actually just like a really like concerning trait that you should see a therapist about.
it's a weight that's going to be the reason your transformation Karen's transformation is so reflective of what writers thought of her in the 60s and 70s. The way Karen is able to have agency is helping other people who are also victims.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so set up here. It's in a lot of ways because there's that really famous Mark Waid quote that I'm going to dine out on until I'm 103, right? Which is, everyone after Frank Miller has spent their time on Daredevil doing shades of Frank Miller to greater or lesser success, including Frank Miller. And I think almost every fucking thing Miller and Jansen built their Daredevil around comes out of this issue.
Oh yeah.
Replace
Oh,
the
100%.
with the Kingpin competent, replace Karen with any number of unfortunate victim women, from Heather
How
Glenn.
how many wives has Matt had now that it's 2022?
I
4?
think I think he's only technically had 2.
2. Okay.
I think it's technically only two, but I think he's had 4 fiancées.
Oh well.
So I'm with, and then there's Foggy. So I feel as though this is such an important issue in the way it tells us what Daredevil will become, that so many of the silly things I can overlook, because crawling out of the river hours later is such a Miller thing. That is such a thing to this day
Yeah.
in Daredevil. Like the Zdarsky run, the
Yeah.
one going on now.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely see the beginnings of something that is real Daredevil in this episode. And I
Yeah.
think that um anyone who says that you can skip the yellow years or you should skip the 60s is mostly right, but is doing you a disservice and missing some of this early stuff. You really are. Like, this is a really fun, excellent issue
Yeah.
that I wish could have been the first, but we needed all of that first issue backstory to exist before we got to here. We really did, unfortunately.
What's weird is and I know it's not how comics worked back then, but I wish that the first issue could have been like an 8-page Fixer backstory origin flashback that told the Fixer story as Daredevil's origin, with Electro as like the 12-page main event. So this could have been like the second issue, because I do agree. If you skip the yellow years, you're doing a disservice to yourself. The Daredevil Yellow miniseries from about 20 years ago does a great job doing some of the work for you. And what I get from the Frank Miller, John Romita Jr., The Man Without Fear 1 through 5 has nothing to do with this. That is not charming. That is not magical. That is perfect storytelling, but it's such a revised origin. And you're right, you're doing a disservice, because this has heart. This has
Yeah.
whimsy, even. And
It's joy, it's campy. You're like, yeah, this is why I'm here. It's like it's it's watching like the best of the 60s Batman show.
and I feel like because it was bi-monthly, we're probably missing out on a lot of garbage, because Bullseye doesn't show up until the 130s, and Elektra and Kingpin till the 170s, 160s. And even the book is going to take a massive turn, and for 40 something issues it's going to be about Daredevil and Black Widow as a team up, and that doesn't start until the 80s, and it's over by the 120s, and everybody forgets about it. So it's like we have so much Daredevil to kind of get through, that the ease of working through these yellow issues, I don't know, I'm ultimately pretty grateful that there's a lot of the Ox, there's a lot of Matador, there's a lot of the crime wave kind of stuff that we're going to come up against that's not as charming, and that's in the red years.
Yeah.
And because yellow really is 6-7 issues, because it features people like Electro and Namor and characters we know, I think ultimately my assessment is with you. You shouldn't skip the yellow years, even though we're only halfway through them, because it's kind of harmless.
Yeah. Yeah. They're harmless, they're fun, they go quickly. I
Yeah.
know it's a lot of reading because, like, to be honest, also now that like I'm in the 80s and like the wordiness has started to drop off on starting in the 1980s, this is a lot of reading, compared to like what's happening now in the 2020s where they're just like 5 words per page. Thank you.
It's like an issue to a trade kind of word count
Yeah.
value.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge the amount of wording that is on the page in these. Like, I can definitely see how people used to be like, yeah, comics are books. Like, they were. This is a lot of words.
And if you think about the per word pay rate, I really feel like when you were paying like a nickel for a book and getting a goddamn novella, it was, I can see where sometimes, I mean, I think that comics at $5.99 a piece are kind of, I make comics. You
You're
make
paying
comics.
for art.
Cost.
You're paying for
Exactly.
art at that point. Yeah.
You're paying for the boutique of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I still think and this isn't to do with anything. I do think that there's still so much value in the less word version, putting more emphasis on the art, because a lot of times the beautiful art does get covered up by words. There's a lot of places where they leave all of the characters uncolored, because why do they need to draw your eye there? Right now they need your eye to focus on the 6 paragraphs that are at the
Right.
top of the panel.
Right. And I imagine it's also not very fun for the letterers, who are just like, this is just technical writing. Like, it's not even the fun stuff. It's not that interesting. It's not involving any character work. Like, it's just literally just words, 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 words.
And speaking of words, the owl is going to get real famous for saying, "Until we meet again, Daredevil." One of the hallmarks of a Daredevil issue like this is it just kind of ends. You know, I feel like Magneto is like, fuck, I'm going to go back to my base and go get a really powerful Holocaust backstory. And I feel like, you know, when it's goddamn Kang, he's like, I'm going to go back to my time base and I'm going to go get myself a real hot MCU actor. What the fuck? And I feel like when it's the owl, he's like, I'm going to go back to my base and sharpen my talons in my cage. And it's just weirdly unsatisfying. Like, that is the one thing I will say about the end of this issue. This issue has no satisfying conclusion.
They still haven't figured out the concluders. Like, they're so interested in packing as much fight into these things as possible, sometimes without even Daredevil being in the fight.
Yeah.
That, like, they're just like, oh crap, we have half a page to finish this guy. Stand here, think this, look at each other real quick, and Matt, you walk away.
And, you know, speaking of Matt, you walk away, I think it's so fascinating. The last person in this book is Karen.
Mm-hmm.
It's specifically Matt walking away, and instead of the complex shadow of Daredevil, it's the straightforward shadow of Matt. So we had that first issue that juxtaposed Matt with the Daredevil shadow, and then we have this issue that goes out of its way to juxtapose Daredevil with a Daredevil shadow and Matt with a Matt shadow. The Daredevil with a Daredevil shadow was in relation to Foggy. Matt with a Matt shadow is in relation to Karen. And it kind of speaks to the duality of the book and the fact that we're so close to homogenization. We get a little bit closer with Purple Man. We get a little bit closer when we get to Stilt Man. You know, we're on our way, but we're clicking along, right?
Yeah. This definitely feels like we're right there. Right there. And there's still some like where you can still tell like this is season 1 and like the lighting budget shit. But Karen is inching closer to the truth. Foggy is inching closer to being a pervert. Like, Matt is looking good on this final page.
Yeah, got like
they thinned his face out, which is always the mark of a better Matt, is the thinner
cheekbones,
face. Yeah, the cheekbones go higher, the jaw narrows a little bit, and his forehead gets a little taller, and his red hair gets really red. I prefer really redheaded Matt Murdock. When they like tone it down, I'm like, boo.
Why is he looking strawberry blonde?
Boo.
That's not the Daredevil yellow I want.
I want it back. So yeah, so I there are parts of the ending where I'm like, yes, thank you for bringing back the right Matt Murdock. But then there's other parts of it where I'm like, we have 0.5 seconds to finish this.
Well, the good news is we are heading toward better issues month by month as Stan Lee continues to grow his pencil on Daredevil. And until next time, when we face down another classic Daredevil yellow issue, everybody, we'll see you next time.
Stay fearless.
Stay fearless. I forgot how to set it up.
But no, what happened was that we normally say our names again at the end.
Oh, she's right. I'm Nico, and you guys can find me being fearless on Twitter and Instagram at Nico Action. That's NicoAction, forgetting to say my own name.
And you can find the duality of Tori Sheehan at Twitter at Tori_Sheehan, and on Instagram at SM Tori. That's Tori with an I. Nico, what are we saying?
Okay, now I think everybody should stay fearless.
Stay fearless.